Stephen asks, how do I make my own unique sound of house music? Because so many people produce house music, which I absolutely love. And Stephen, yes, you can make unique music within a genre because not all music within a genre is what I would call generic. And I know this for a fact because in my previous career, twice, in fact, I was one of the people who was there right at the start of a type of house music and it came about as a result of some of the things that I'm telling you about in this unique music series. Back in 94, 95, when I started making music, we wanted to make house music. And at that time, most house music was extremely loop based. It sort of started to eat itself. It was like it became very boring. Every piece of music that was big seemed to have an enormous snare drum fill in it that went on for absolutely ever. And there was very little music in it. And me and my mate Andy, who went on to do Groove Armada, and another guy called Dan, we were classically trained and we wanted to put more music into house music. We wanted there to be more actual music in there, not just the lowest common denominator as we saw it. To be honest, looking back on it now, the way that I was listening to that kind of music, I probably didn't really get it. But anyway, that's the way we felt. So as a reaction against that, we started making music, playing lots of musical parts in there. We made longer pieces of music. They tended to have more breakdowns in them and lots of strings and big piano parts. And it became known as progressive house. And of course, it wasn't only us doing it. We were very influenced by other people doing the same thing, people like BT and Sasha and Digweed and people like that. But we were one of the bands that started doing that around that time in the mid-90s. And it's actually a really good example of how focusing on zagging when others are zigging can really make you break through. Because the very first record that we put out was played on Radio 1. I mean, we didn't even have it signed to a record label. We literally pressed up the vinyl ourselves onto white labels. It got played on Radio 1. And then our second release, Sasha picked it as one of his tracks for his essential, it was like a Pete Tong collection. So there was Pete Tong, there was Paul Oakenfold, there was Cole Cox, and there was Sasha. And Pete Tong, Paul Oakenfold, and Cole Cox all had the usual like 15 tracks or something on there. Sasha only chose 4, and one of them was by us. It was a track called Beat Foundation, Save Me. If you look it up online, you can see the track listings, and you'll see Sasha only had 4 tracks on there, and one of them was ours. And that was literally our second release. Why? Because we took house music and we did something unique with it. We had our own unique take on it. And it wasn't exactly that we were the only people doing it, but we were certainly taking 2 different things, house music and classical music, and putting them together in our own particular way. And then about 10 years later, in around 2004, 2005, 2006, I was DJing a lot at that point and playing house music, and I was kind of getting sick of the type of music that was around very much in London at the time. And I got inspired by the music coming out of Berlin, which was electro. It was like the electro revival. And when I was DJing at my residency, I actually promoted a night called Playtime for a few years in London. It was I can't remember actually, I think it was every month or something. I tried playing out some of these electro tracks from Berlin, and they would always clear the floor. I really wanted something that was a bit more punchy, that had a bit more oomph, that was a bit less underground, that was a bit more accessible, but which was influenced by these sounds and these types of parts that I was hearing out of Berlin. So that's what I did. I started putting together some more kind of funky beats with the electro-y sounds, and me and a few other producers as well at the time that were doing that. That was where electro house started. I'm not saying that I started electro house. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I specifically remember at the time being shocked to find out that lots of other people had the same idea at the same time. And it came out of a reaction of being bored with what existed. So then electro house became a thing, and pretty soon it kind of got copied and distorted into something else, just as happened to progressive house as well. So it's absolutely possible to make music within a genre that isn't generic, but it takes thinking about what doesn't exist and also a problem that you're trying to solve. For example, when we made those early progressive house tunes with Beat Foundation, the problem that we were solving was that we felt that the music around was getting very boring because there wasn't much music in it. It was all very sample based, it was very loop based, and there were just these massive snare drum fills in there that made people go, yes, it definitely made people go nuts, but they were a little bit lowest common denominator. So we thought, well, who are we? Well, we are musicians who have been classically trained. So we want to bring our strengths to bear within this music. And that's why we started making what became known as progressive house. Then the same thing with the electro house thing. I needed to play this music I was getting inspired by, but I couldn't play a lot of the stuff out of Berlin because it would just clear the floor. It was just a bit too weird and the beats weren't punchy enough. They weren't upfront enough. So I solved that problem by making tracks which combined the beats of what used to be known as funky house with those electro sounds and parts. And again, another example of doing something different, doing something unique, helping your career. In the electro house example, I ended up getting into Mixmag as one of the producers leading the new electro house sound. So once again, you're not going to be heard above the noise if you sound exactly the same as the noise. And there are, in any genre, those producers, those artists who are very generic, the followers. But there are also artists within a genre who aren't followers, who are actually moving the music forward, who are taking it into new areas. And I'd certainly argue, although I am biased because that's kind of how I've run my whole career, but I'd certainly argue that these artists are the one that move the music forward. I mean, without artists like this, you wouldn't even have house music in the first place. You wouldn't have any of the genres in the first place, which is why I certainly feel that purists are ridiculous, techno purists or drum and bass purists or psychedelic trance purists, because those genres initially came about as a result of somebody going against the purists. So I'll get off my soapbox now and talk about how to think about this, how to actually do this, how to work within a genre and create your own unique style within it. Because while in my case, in my music now, I'm not thinking about genres at all. I'm not thinking about working within a genre. I'm simply making my music. But if you do want to work within a genre like house or drum and bass or folk or whatever genre it might be, it is possible to not be generic and still work within a genre. And if you are working in a genre like house or drum and bass or techno, generally anyway, instrumental genres, it's even more important to develop your unique style. Because certainly in instrumental music, you don't have the leg up of the human voice. The human voice is automatically unique. That doesn't mean to say, though, that if you're singing on your tracks, then you don't need to develop your unique style. That's not true at all. But certainly a unique voice does make it instantly recognizable as that person because of the way the human voice is. I can recognize somebody simply from their voice. That doesn't mean that you don't have to work on your unique style if you're singing and writing songs. I'm certainly working just as hard on that. In fact, the way that I sing is one of the things I'm attempting to make unique. But certainly if you are singing, you do get somewhat of a leg up. However, if you're writing mainly instrumental music, or if the music that you're making that isn't instrumental is employing another singer, then you've really got to focus on developing your unique style to stand out, to stand above the noise. what causes someone to perceive a piece of music in a genre are what I call sonic signposts, particular sonic signposts. And what sonic signposts are a particular choice within a style element. So, what a style element is something like melody, harmony, bass, sound design, instrumentation, which is somewhat different from sound design, because obviously instrumentation could be a guitar. You wouldn't really call a guitar sound design unless you were doing sound design with it, right? So instrumentation, structure, tempo, lyrics, all of these are what I call style elements. And a sonic signpost is a choice that is made within those style elements. So for example, let's talk about house music. Probably most forms of house music, you could say that there is a kick drum on every beat of a 4/4 bar. Boom, 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 boom. Otherwise known as a 4 to the floor kick. So in the style element of rhythm, house music's sonic signpost is a 4 to the floor kick. Now that doesn't mean that every piece of music that has a 4 to the floor kick is house music. For example, we have disco. But what makes it more likely for the piece of music to be house music is if that 4 to the floor kick is played by an electronic drum machine like a 909. So if we have 909 and 4 to the floor kick, so those two sonic signposts in instrumentation and rhythm, then that is likely to be house music. Again, it's not sure to be house music because we also hear other sonic signposts within other style elements. So tempo is another style element. If it's house music, it's likely to be between, and this is arguable, but between 120 and 128 BPM. But of course, if we think about disco, some disco is going to be at that tempo as well. So then we have to think about other style elements. And when I am developing my unique style and when I help other people do it, the way I like to do this is to think about developing my own unique style map. So how I want you to think about this is it looks like a target, okay? Concentric circles. So the bullseye of the target would be, for instance, 4 to the floor kick for house music. That is something that always is in a piece of house music. Now, of course, you might say, yes, but Mike, there's this piece of house music here where in this section, there isn't a 4 to the floor kick. There are always exceptions, which proves the rule, right? But essentially, what you want to think about is the center of the bullseye for your unique style map is a sonic signpost, which is always there. And then the next concentric circle out would be the sonic signposts, which are mostly there. So if we were talking about house music, I mean, again, it's arguable. You could argue that it's always there, but a hat and a clap going scats, scats, scats. Let's say that's in the next concentric circle out, which is mostly. Then the further concentric circle out, we have sometimes, the sonic signposts that are sometimes there. The next one out, sonic signposts which are occasionally there. The next one out, things that are rarely there. And then outside of this target are the sonic signposts that are never there. So if I was to do an analysis of most, I don't know, let's say tech house, I could build a unique style map of tech house using that target. I could explain tech house, why we perceive tech house as being tech house by plotting various different sonic signposts, these style elements, on that unique style map. And then what you could do if you wanted to work within tech house but create your own unique style is simply add some of your own sonic signposts. So for example, in my progressive house example, at that point in time, house music did not have any classical elements. There wasn't what we used to call much music in it. It was very loop, very sample based, and there wasn't much playing in it. So we used to use lots of pianos and lots of strings. We used to play things in from our classical training. BT was doing a very similar thing. So in other words, we removed the sonic signposts of repetitive samples and we replaced it with melodic piano lines and lush strings. We removed the sonic signpost of enormously long snare drum fills and replaced it with huge hands in the air piano moments. Similarly, in electro house, when I was doing those experiments for the first time, I removed the sonic signposts of funky, sometimes played bass lines that sounded like they were actually bass guitars from funky house, and replaced it with buzzy synth sounds and very repetitive single note bass lines. And even though these sonic signposts in and of themselves weren't unique, putting them together in a different way, putting different sonic signposts that hadn't been heard together, made a new genre. And that's what me and a bunch of other producers at that time were doing. And instantly our careers shot through the roof. I'm as sure as I am about anything that if I'd have stayed making funky house, if I'd have got stuck there in that genre and hadn't got inspired by the electro coming out of Berlin and put it together with house beats, then I wouldn't have had the success I had and ended up DJing all over the world as Mike Monday. But I'm guessing that right now you're asking yourself, but Mike, how do I choose what sonic signpost to introduce to my genre to create something new? These sonic signposts want to be something that are authentic to you, something that you have, maybe justification is the wrong word, but there's a reason that you've chosen it. So it could be a skill that you have. So for example, with Beat Foundation, when we were making very early progressive house, we were all classically trained musicians who could play the piano. So that's what we included, that's what we brought to house music. That's the sonic signposts that we use. So in other words, we were expressing our strength. On the other side, you can also de-emphasize your weaknesses. The way that we use the piano and the classical type parts that we were using were replacing the very loopy sample bass stuff that we weren't familiar with and weren't that into. So you can think about choosing sonic signposts which emphasize your strengths and de-emphasize your weaknesses. Also, you can get inspired by your musical history. This is one of the steps that I would recommend that everyone takes. You make a playlist called My Musical History and choose 20 tracks which tell the story of how you came to be the musician you are, with all of the different music that you've listened to. Now, the reason I say 20 tracks, and it might be quite tricky to choose just 20 tracks, but that's for a particular reason. If you do that, what you're actually doing by choosing a particular track that represents a part of your musical history, you're making some choices as to what's important for that part of your musical history. And this can illuminate some sonic signposts you might choose. And I would recommend when you're experimenting with bringing sonic signposts from other genres into your genre, that you maybe choose things that are quite unusual. I mean, to be honest, in the electro house example, it was pretty easy, it was pretty close, it was pretty obvious, which is probably why so many other producers did it at the same time. They were inspired by the Berlin sound as well. What you want to do is find inspiration from music which really speaks to you. That is something that will make it something that uniquely expresses who you are. Another approach you can take is to think of it as solving a problem. So in the electro house example, you'll remember that I was attempting to play this electro on London dance floors and it would clear the floor every time. So that created a problem. There was a type of music that didn't exist that I needed to exist. So I made it. So if you're sick of a certain thing in the genre that you're in, if you're sick and tired of something, if you're bored of something, then how can you remove it and replace that sonic signpost, that ingredient, with something else that does inspire you? You as an individual artist, You are the only person on the face of this planet who's ever existed that has your particular constellation of strengths, weaknesses, influences, inspirations, story, equipment, gear, setup, software. You're the only person on the face of this planet that has the particular qualities that you have. If you want to make unique music, whether it's within a genre, like I used to in the past in my previous career, or whether it's outside of any genre, like I'm doing right now, your music, to make it unique, it wants to express you, who you are as an artist at this point in time, in as many ways as possible as that means. Because what you might find surprising is that when you make music that expresses who you are now, not only is it easier to make, once you've figured out what it is, of course, not only is it quicker to make, but it will also be better. It will be of a higher quality automatically. Think about it. If you are making music that uses elements that you have chosen, that speak to your strengths, de-emphasize your weaknesses, and inspire you, of course, it's automatically going to be better and it's going to be unique. So this is what we're doing in the new Make an Album with Mike program, Make an Album with Mike 6, which I'm calling Make a Unique Album with Mike. Over the next 3 months, we're going to be making an album in order to develop our unique styles. So you can develop your own unique style map, identify the sonic signposts that are going to work for you over the course of making an album. So that in 3 months' time, not only will you have developed your own unique style, whether that's within a genre or outside of a genre, you will have something to show for it. You will have a unique album finished. And whether you choose to release that album as an album or you choose to release it as separate tracks, you will have something to show for it. So if you're interested in finding out about joining Make a Unique Album with Mike, send me an email to mike@makemusicyourlife.com and I'll send you all the details. And with all that said, onwards and upwards.